Welcome back to our Retirement Education video series. I'm Captain Pat May, the Negotiating Committee Chairman. Together today with me are Captain Rich Brown, Negotiating Committee Member, Captain Ben Douglas, the R&I Committee Chairman, and Captain Kevin Biggins, the R&I Vice Chairman. Fellas, welcome.
Good to be here, Pat.
So today we're going to give a broad overview of the previous videos that we've discussed. But the goal here for the pilots was to help introduce concepts and information to them, especially the pilots that maybe have been hired since 2015, that may be not as familiar with their current benefits as the rest of the pilots that have been here through contract negotiations prior. So with that, Ben, I'd like to turn to you first and see if you can explain or at least give an overview of some of the advantages and disadvantages of defined contribution only plans.
So in a DC only plan, you're immediately vested. In other words, the money's yours from day one, 100%. You get to invest those assets as you see fit. You're responsible for developing, implementing, and monitoring the plan. The problem with that is that you run into those risks that we talked about in previous podcasts and videos, particularly longevity risk. I'll also note that if you're young or if you are starting your career at a younger age and you have a long time horizon, you might be able to accumulate a significant amount of wealth during that time horizon. However, if you are older or if you started your career later in life, then you may not have the same opportunity to capture that benefit based on your compensation.
Yeah, and so that's something that we look at and take care to make sure we're looking at when we make improvements on the DC side, even though we have both plans, DB and DC. That DC implemented piece, we have to understand that there's a generational problem, right? A DC improvement really significantly improves the younger pilot over the senior pilot. So those are just things we need to consider.
True.
Thanks, Ben. But Kevin, in the meantime, maybe can you provide an overview or highlights pros and cons of the flat dollar formula?
Yeah, sure. So that comes up recently because UPS did increase their flat dollar formula on a temporary basis. That's going to affect some of their pilots who will retire in their current contract. And an increase in the flat dollar formula is an increase in the defined benefit plan. It does, for a pro, it does provide a fixed benefit at retirement. However, there still are some risks that remain in the plan, and for the employer, they are the funding, the investment, and longevity risk would still remain with the employer. And then conversely, on the employee side, you still have any bankruptcy and inflation risk associated along with that.
So let's move on a little bit, Ben, and discuss some of the challenges of making improvements to the defined benefit plan, such as the FAE cap.
Obviously, getting an increase in the final average earnings would ultimately increase the defined benefit. The pilot group understands our plan, our current traditional defined benefit plan. The problem is we still face inflation risk. And so regardless of improving that benefit, that is the biggest risk to us. Contrast that to the company, and we've talked about this in previous videos and podcasts, is the liability that they incur due to market volatility. And so when the assets and the liabilities in acute downturn markets, they have to sometimes put a significant amount of money in the plan to fund it. And so that has been, I think, the biggest sticking point for us with respect to trying to negotiate a better final average earning benefit.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct, Ben. You can see through our negotiating history with the company that they're very concerned about that volatility and that liability because it's been very problematic in trying to get an increase to that final average earnings number. As a matter of fact, every time we've pushed across a proposal that has an increase to the final average earnings, the company has responded with a proposal to freeze the traditional benefit plan. And that dynamic is unlikely to change as we move into these new negotiations. So it is very problematic. And as Ben mentioned, the inflation risk, even if we are able to raise the final average earnings number, that value begins to decrease as soon as the contract is signed. So someone that retires the year the contract is signed will actually get a bigger retirement than someone that retires at the end of the contract. And then we have to renegotiate another increase in the cap every time we go into negotiations going forward. So we're always fighting this same battle over and over again.
So Rich, those are all excellent points, especially with the final average earnings. But we know that if we change any portion of that formula, you know, the actual percentage, the FAE or the years of service cap, that's going to have an instantaneous and long-term effect on both FedEx cash and accounting liability that will show up on their books. We're absolutely not afraid to make those moves. We've presented those proposals in previous negotiations. If the MEC wants and directs us to go after that as their goal based off of pilot input, clearly we are going to run and make that attempt with FedEx. But we shouldn't underestimate FedEx's desire to move away from the pension. So it's 180 degrees out from what we desire as pilots in terms of making improvements on the pension. Realistic expectation versus potential to negotiate a successful improvement in the A plan, those are the things that the MEC has to weigh and internally discuss and make sure that they have attainable goals that are well understood by the pilots. So as we discussed challenges with making improvements to the defined benefit plans, we saw that the company moved their non-pilot employees to that cash balance plan. So let's discuss a little bit why they may have made that move, or at least the pros and cons of the cash balance plan.
As we've discussed in previous videos and podcasts, a cash balance plan is a defined benefit plan. It has a pay credit and an interest rate credit associated with it. It's in a nominal account. It's held in trust. The main difference is at the end of the participant's career, they have the option of either annuitizing it in payments into perpetuity, or they can lump sum that amount out at the end of their career. The pros and cons that we've talked about previously, obviously the pros allows all the risk to fall on the plan sponsor like any other defined benefit plan does. The con is any investment returns above that fixed investment interest rate credit, if you will, goes back to the company.
So while we're on the topic of defined benefit plans, the PSPP, we gave a really good overview of what it's all about and the stabilization features within it. I think the pros clearly speak to the strength of the final average earnings being removed, the years of service cap being removed, and then of course the stabilization features that are built into the plan. And again, we see inherent value in negotiating something that auto-adjusts throughout our careers here at FedEx. And that plan design does just that with our increasing pensions. The con, if there's disadvantages in the plan, well, number one, it's an unknown for the pilots. So it's a challenge to get the education level up, to get pilots' comfort level with something that's entirely new. The second challenge, again, it has to do with its career average earnings versus the strength of our current traditional plan, which is a high 5 FAE formula. So that's probably the downside of that plan. But it does ameliorate or limit a lot of the known problems that FedEx has with the current traditional plan. So that was a good review. You guys have any kind of final thoughts or that you want to wrap up in this last video?
I think what I would like to convey to the pilot group is that the intent for this education series was simply to talk about all things retirement. We're not biased towards one option or the other. We just wanted to be able to explain to the pilot group what these things are, and when they talk about them in context, hopefully give them some sort of base level knowledge of what they're saying and how these things work. There's a lot of misconceptions, and this is a very difficult subject or topic to discuss. And so our hope for the R&I committee was that we would present this material hopefully in a fashion that is easy to understand, and we can be able to talk about it in a pilot group factually and come away with a better understanding as we go into contract 2021 of the things that we actually want.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ben. And I know you guys have invested a lot of time and effort in producing this for the pilots, and I appreciate that effort. I think if I were to kind of wrap things up a little bit here for us, and that's the pilots really have to understand that we have a monumental task ahead of us going into contract preparations and contract negotiations in 2021. I think we've outlined the challenges that we face in trying to bring improvements to the pilots of FedEx. Ultimately, we collectively are all in this boat together, and we all want to be successful in this endeavor. We don't want to leave any pilots behind. We won't leave any pilots behind while we make improvements in the retirement benefit world. We know that the company is going to treat it, as they always have, as a business endeavor and keep their costs down as low as possible. It's our job to produce benefits and a real contract improvement for the pilots. So we have a monumental task ahead, and we shouldn't minimize what that task is. Ultimately, though, what we need to do is move on and move beyond the discussion points of what was previously done, who ratified, or the ratification percentage of 2015, whether you voted for the contract or against the contract in 2015, really makes no difference to this team here. We've done our homework. We did our extensive lessons learned. We looked back at the history, not just the history from 2015, but we've gone all the way back to 1999, pulled up every single contract passed back and forth. We looked at the outcome and we looked at the ratification. We found where our weaknesses were. We identified our strengths. We're going to capitalize on those strengths and we're going to eliminate the weaknesses. It's time to move forward as a unified pilot force. We can't do that if we continue to bicker and discuss who voted for or against the contract. That's not a unified voice. The MEC represents the pilots. They represent the pilots well. You have a strong voice in the MEC and the leadership team. That MEC tasks the negotiating committee to move forward. They're going to give us the priorities going into negotiations in 2021 based off of the information that the pilots have provided through surveys, unity meetings, and also from the committee chairs, such as Ben Douglas. This information is going to arm us, but if we don't have the unified voice of the full FedEx pilot team pulling forward to have a successful contract negotiation, we won't be successful. So I ask all of you to remain engaged, remain focused, and let's speak as a single unified voice as we move into Contract 2021. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.